regular meeting of the, do I need to read that header? About notice being given?
Yes.
Okay. Notice hereby given of a regular meeting of the Shelter Advisory Committee on the City of San Angelo will be held on November 16th, 2017 at 12 p.m. in the Midneast Convention Center, South Meeting Room, 501 Rio Concho Drive, San Angelo, Texas, for the purpose of considering the following agenda items. We'll start with public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium. Begin by stating your name and limit your remarks to less than 3 minutes. Committee members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The committee takes public comment in all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment? There being none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. We're going to consider approving the September 21st, 2017 Animal Shelter Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes. Have y'all had a chance to review them? Anyone have any changes? Do I have a motion to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. We'll also consider approving the October 19th, 2017 Animal Shelter Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes. Everybody had a chance to review? Yes. Do I have a motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. So approved. Okay, on the regular agenda, we'll start with the discussion of possible action related to the monthly shelter numbers for September 2017. Morgan?
Good afternoon. I have several items before you today. Since our October meeting was a workshop, we didn't have the opportunity to go over the September numbers. I'm going to hit those just the high points mostly, because what I want to spend some more time in is our fiscal year 17 overall numbers for the entire fiscal year, which is the next agenda item. So for the September numbers, if I may, that marked where we were at 18 months in a row of no adoptable pets being euthanized. We had just over 30 individuals using our microchip clinic. We did have 513 new arrivals, so that's a little up from in the past. I think the largest number y'all have seen recently is about 644, so certainly a manageable number. We had 137 adoptions, 64 redeemed by their owner, and unfortunately 275 euthanized, which left us at the end of the month with 292 lives in the shelter. We were hustling late September, early October, because we were bumping that threshold. I get a little nervous when we're over 285 lives. We need to start moving animals at that point. And so that's where we ended September. We did achieve a 65% live release rate. Of the 275 animals that we did have to consider euthanizing, almost 200 of them were cats, which of course you'll see quite frequently in our numbers, that the vast majority of them are cats. And then of the 200, another way of breaking down that 275 that were euthanized, 151 were sick, injured, or failure to thrive. The vast majority of those are cats as well, because of the cats that come in with upper respiratory infection. Unfortunately, we have to deal with those quickly because otherwise they'll infect the rest of our population. So that is where we are on September numbers.
Any questions? Any public comment? All right. Next agenda item is discussion and possible action related to the annual shelter numbers for fiscal year 16-17.
So in kind of the same format, of course, this was our first full year in the no-kill initiative, meaning that we had adopted this as a principle in the mid-year of fiscal year 16. So 2017 was our first full year to be under kind of that umbrella. We had 277 citizens using the microchip clinic, and for those of y'all that remember our August numbers, over half of that, about half of that, was during our Clear the Shelter adoption event. And so that's one thing that's weighing on my staff's heart heavily, is how do we get more microchip out there into the community? It is our required method of registration. The state does require that all animals in a community have to be registered. The city council opted that meant microchip, no longer just a city tag. And so we've got to find a way to have a greater canvas to areas. We've tried a few things, such as having the animal control officers, instead of citing you in the field for having no microchip, we would administer the microchip at that time. That brings with it its own set of pros and cons. We kind of use that sparingly because of the issues that arise from that, just the amount of paperwork related to a microchip, as well as being in a secure environment to administer that large shot. So we're trying to figure out a better way to do more microchipping. From an intake perspective, we had 4,800 animals as new arrivals in the facility. That is down from prior years. I believe the year before it was about 6,000. In past years, it's been as much as 10 to 12,000 as far as new arrivals in the facility. The main things that I attribute that to is we really had a crackdown of servicing only Tongaring County, meaning that we're only going to respond to calls for service inside the city limits. That is our jurisdiction, okay? We're also only going to accept pets from Tongaring County. It was not uncommon that we would have dozens of animals brought from outside Tongaring County. We just want to encourage those folks to use the resources in their local area. We are not equipped to take in and service the entire region. And so that was something that gained some permission and acceptance in the past. And so it's something that we put into place. Fiscal year 17 was the first full year that you saw of that as well. We also had the effects of the free roaming community cat ordinance, where we're no longer responding to calls for cats and traps, people wanting us to pick up cats. If you have a cat that you want to surrender to us, whether it's a feral cat, a domesticated cat, whatever it may be, it's something that you need to bring to our facility. And so that when we gave those rights to feral cats to be able to free roam, that meant that I was bringing fewer feral cats into my facility. And so those are the two major reasons why. We also hope that a lot of that had to do with the spay-neuter. When we made spay-neuter a requirement inside city limits, that every pet must be spay-neutered if you live inside city limits, that hopefully that means that I have less intake. And so kind of in that order, I think those are the major things that are driving why our intake was down as overall in the year. So for fiscal year 17, we had almost 1,700 adoptions. That's up about 60 from the year before. We've hovered around that 1,600 mark for a while now, and so that's where we hit on adoptions. I think that very much speaks to, and in fiscal year 17, we hustled. There was a ton of resources deployed for adoptions. I think really what you can say is in a closed system, such as just being in our community, there are only so many people looking to add a family member to their home. There are only so many people willing to take on a rescue or come to a shelter environment. And so having these relationships now going into our new calendar year of being able to do transports out to other communities that are in need of inventory, that's a lot of our answer to our pet overpopulation problem. I think that that's really why our adoptions are staying mostly static. We also had 400 animals redeemed by their owner. We had 35 wildlife released, and unfortunately, of the 4,800 animals, we had 2,400 were euthanized for a variety of reasons I'll go into in just a moment. So we achieved for fiscal year 17 a 49% live release rate. That number I think can be disheartening, but I do want to remind folks that that's down from that's an improvement from a 20% live release rate. That's ahead of schedule. When we adopted the no-kill initiative, we did not expect to hit basically a 50% live release rate in just a year and a half of being into this initiative. So that's huge. It's getting better, but that's where we ended the year. So of the 2,400 animals that were euthanized, again, 1,600 were cats, 600 were dogs, 4 were other, so that could be livestock, and then 98 were other wildlife, mostly skunks, because we're unable to safely relocate them. We generally euthanize them because they are at high risk of carrying rabies. Okay, another way to break down that euthanasia, 1,000 of the euthanized, so almost half, were either sick, injured, or failure to thrive. And of course, failure to thrive were meaning those litters of kittens, litters of puppies that were weaned from their mother too soon or brought to us too soon, and we're unable to bottle feed them, keep them healthy. And then 900 were feral cats who were not sick, and then almost 300 were aggressive or bite quarantine. That's the majority of the animals that we euthanized in fiscal year 17. So those are our figures for fiscal year 17.
Any public comment? Questions from the committee?
No, I think that's a pretty good improvement. I mean, that's, if you look at that, it's a 200% improvement in a live release rate. You know, if you look on a percentage scale, which is pretty impressive. I think one of the things that sticks out still is that the feral numbers are pretty much almost about half of the euthanized animals on a, you know, scale. They're 80% of the, not 80, but a very large percent of the population that's euthanized. So I think that's probably going to be should be something that's addressed in the future.
And of course, the feral cats that we're euthanizing in the free roaming community cat ordinance, it stated that community cat caregivers will spay neuter, will ear notch, will tattoo, whatever it may be. And so in the event that we receive a feral cat that does not have any of that, does not have a microchip, no way to identify it, no way to prove it, those are the ones that we are euthanizing. And so because we can't match them back to where they came from. And so whether they're coming from cat colonies or just spontaneously occurring feral cats, we don't have a lot of background on where they're coming from. We just have citizens bringing them to us, requesting as a nuisance that they be processed through our shelter, whether that means returning to their colony or unfortunately being euthanized. But I agree that there is, it's a fight that needs to continue to be fought.
I really do think it speaks volumes when you look at the numbers. The shelter took in almost 5,000 last year, and 443 were redeemed by owner. I mean, it speaks volumes as to what the root of the problem is, but it also, I think, speaks volumes to the amount of work that's going in to try to keep this no-kill initiative going, because we're getting a lot of animals in, but we don't have a lot of owners looking for them.
Do you think that the
agree.
microchip, do you think since the mandatory microchipping, has that seemed to increase the return to owner?
Yes, and I think that is a true statement, Dr. Schultze. One of the, I kind of am hard on ourselves that we only had 277 private citizens using the microchip clinic, but these 1,600 adopted pets,
Are all microchipped?
were all microchipped. So really that was 2,000 animals released to the community that were microchipped. And so in the past, when we had an animal shelter adoption and it was not microchipped, we did not have much success in saying, I know this is a dog that's been here before. I know that there's a family that adopted it from us, that looked us in the eye and said, this is going to be our pet for the rest of its natural life. But we couldn't match back to that family very easily. So the microchipping has helped tremendously in pets that have been through our facility through some way. So if you're and also on the converse side, if your animal was running at large and you come in to redeem them from us, we're going to say, oh, and by the way, you better do your microchip today. That'll be $13, please. And so those are getting microchipped as well. That's a lot of what you'll see here in this. So in any case, the microchipping is huge as far as the record keeping to be able to make good contact with owners.
And also this, after the initiative was passed, I know a lot of clinics had an increase in people using microchips. So I think overall it is being helpful. And then as far as, return rates, I will tell you that one of the things, though, that I'll stress just as a general comment to the general public is that if you change your address or change your phone number, please update your microchip information, because we've had people, haven't updated their stuff and it's 8-year-old microchip and none of the phone numbers work. So it kind of puts us in a bind. So I know that is one of the things that does help too. But overall, the ones that have microchips, man, they all seem to go back a whole lot quicker. So it's really been nice.
Does the 443, some of those also got microchipped as well, right? The ones that were redeemed by their owners?
Correct. So if your animal's in our facility, whether it was because it was found running loose and it came in as a stray, or it was quarantined in a bite case, if you come to redeem that animal, we're gonna say, you know you're not microchipped and it's required by law, please do that at this time. And so some of them opt to do that right then as they're redeeming the animal. Some of them would rather do that through their veterinarian or through other means. We're not the only game in town, as Dr. Schulte mentioned. Contra Valley Paws does a tremendous number of microchipping as well. But yes, of the redeemed owner, I can't compel or force that individual at that time to give their microchip. We do say you have 10 days to get the microchip done, whether you do it through us or not. If you are not compliant within 10 days, at that point, we do have the opportunity to write you a citation. Forgive me, we have the opportunity to write a citation that day. Today, you do not have a microchip. Today, you're in violation of the law. We choose to give you a 10-day grace period where we then follow up with you. I'm sure you can imagine that people are hard to get a hold of to write them a citation after they already know we're looking for them. So
conceivably, with the 1,600 that were adopted, the 400 that were redeemed, and the 277 that came in specifically were microchipped, you're probably over 2,000 for the year that received microchips.
Sure, I think that could be a very fair statement. Absolutely. And I had the opportunity to make this presentation to the council. I hated to make it to them before I'd made it to y'all, but just how the calendar fell. They had been asking for like a 100-day update since my time out there at the facility. And so we talked a lot about this. We talked about the ebb and flow of animals coming in, whatever we're dealing with. We're an open facility. And so they had a lot of the same feedback y'all are having as well. I apologize. I have one more thing. One thing I pointed out to the council, and I'm sure that y'all are aware as well, is this was our first full fiscal year with the No-Kill initiative. It's not uncommon that when you make an overarching change in philosophy like that, it comes with additional resources, meaning this was a major change for my facility, the major change for my division. But our facility is unchanged. It is the same building we have had since 1999. Our staffing is unchanged. Our budget is unchanged. So I understand more than most the limitations of local government. But to take on, it is a daily struggle, is a daily effort from my staff to stay on the No-Kill initiative. If we had additional resources, if we had additional facilities, whatever it is that the council was able to consider in a future funding opportunity, we would be able to do more. We've done 18 months of the No-Kill initiative by the skin of our teeth, not because we really had everything we needed to do the job. But if we're going to make a major change in philosophy like that, as the economic condition of the city changes, that sales tax is performing better and better, then I think we've got to be considered at the front of the line for some funding if the council wants to consider continuing this initiative. And they were amenable to that. They understood where I was coming from.
Move on to discussion item 3, discuss some possible action related to monthly shelter numbers from October 17.
Okay, so this was our first month into the new fiscal year, of course. We had 19 months in a row now of being online with that No-Kill initiative. We had 22 citizens using the microchip clinic. We had 533 new arrivals, so largely the same as September. We had 162 adoptions, 52 redeemed by owner, and unfortunately 322 euthanized. So for October, we performed a little better than fiscal year 17 as a whole with a 60% live release rate, and hopefully that is forecasting for things to come that will continue that. Jenny, do you want to speak at all a little bit about our performance in October was somewhat hindered because of other things going on in the state?
We've seen Contra Valley Paws purchased a transport van, and so we've been doing, in the last quarter of your fiscal year, we did quite a few transports. And we were doing 40, 50 dogs at a time. It was incredible. But then Hurricane Harvey hit, followed thereby the one that hit Puerto Rico. And so what's happened is that the nation jumped which is fantastic. I just wish we saw a little bit more of this activity all the time. The nation jumped to help those dogs that were displaced, and many, many, many of the dogs that were displaced out of Houston have taken place in the shelters that we were transporting to. So instead of having empty shelters willing to take dogs from a small community like San Angelo, they're full now with Hurricane Harvey dogs. And Houston has a huge population of heartworm positive dogs. And so there's some health issues that these rescues are not familiar with dealing with in the Midwest. So all of this come together to create just kind of the perfect storm for us, because little communities like us that are struggling with a no-kill initiative, our pipeline was kind of cut off. Now we're still doing transports, but instead of sending 40 this time, I think we got to send 26. We had 30 that we got to send just yesterday. Yeah, I think Wednesday. My days are running together. So, there's still things happening. It's just not the numbers that we were anticipating, because since we got the van, and I think it's only been about 3 months now that we've had our own van, we do 357 transports out. That's 357 lives changed and removed from this community, spayed, neutered, and adopted out elsewhere. Anytime we can do a transport, it's wonderful because it's not taking up a home here, and they're spayed and they're neutered, and we know that they're going to a safe place. So that's one of the things that I think 162 adopted was still really good for the month of October. We start seeing things slow down. December, not normally we see a spike. Then right after the holidays, it's pretty slow until February. So I think October, all in all, with all the challenges we had, it was a fair month.
And that was a small blip for us. We're confident that these transports are going to pick back up as those shelters catch up with the issues they're dealing with. So globally, it was a really good thing that worked out. We were just kind of left out in the cold. Everything happened as it should, but and we had the space in our facility to hold those animals a little longer, luckily. And so just one thing I wanted y'all to be aware of. Okay, so of the 322 animals that were euthanized, of course, 200 were cats. We continue to see that again and again. 95 were dogs. Then we had a multitude of wildlife and livestock. I'll tell you this, October was an unmatched month for livestock. We've never seen a response to livestock the way we have. And what I mean by that is there are 2 goats running loose on Loop 306. There is 1 pig running loose in a neighborhood off of Armstrong that I had the pleasure of catching. That's new to me. So we just had a tremendous amount of livestock coming into the facility. We were full in our barns. We had a horse, 2 pigs, a peahen, a rooster, 3 goats. I mean, all the things. We had all the things, right? And so we were full in our barns. Luckily, we have an outlet to make those adoptions. We had a lot of resources. But when they come in as stray for dogs, we hold them for 3 days, right? For cats, we hold them for 3 days. If it's livestock that come in as stray, you have to hold them for 14 days. And so that's a tremendous burden on me and my staff. We had to step up scheduling a little bit to be able to cover that additional responsibility. But as soon as those 14 days were up, those animals started moving very quickly. We only have 1 horse left in the facility now, and he's kind of a special needs case, so we'll keep him as long as we need to find the right place for him. But a lot of our intake was augmented, was unusual. We had to figure out some creative solutions of who would get along with who. We had to move the baby pig, I think, 3 times. It's just, and I finally asked my staff, this is weird, right? Like, this is not just me. And they said, no, we've never had this kind of livestock in our facility. So that's kind of the story of October. We did unfortunately have 5 sheep that we euthanized, and that was due to a private citizen. A stray dog came into their property, dug under, and injured all of his sheep. And so they called us to investigate the case. And unfortunately, they could not seek medical care. They were beyond saving. So we did the humane thing and went ahead and put them down at the owner's request. Okay, so of the 322 that were euthanized, 177 were sick, injured, or failure to thrive. 81 were feral cats, and then 37 were aggressive or bite quarantine animals. I know I brought to y'all our bite case standard operating procedure recently, and I just want to let y'all know that we continue to improve on that. We declared our first dog dangerous in October, whereby we notified the owner and said, this is becoming an issue that's unsafe for the community. If you insist on having this pet, you're going to have to jump through some additional hoops. You're going to have to carry a certain level of insurance. You're going to have put up signs, have a secure enclosure, all of those things. So we're working closely with the court system on cases like that. Since that one, we've had a couple of more. And so we continue to kind of become better informed on processes on dealing with aggressive and bite quarantine animals. So that was October.
Any public comment? Questions from the committee? Okay. Next item is discussion of possible action related to the request for proposal for adoption services. I think Jenny was going to recuse herself from this discussion. She does not legally have to, but she chooses to because her organization is a part of this process. So that leaves us short on quorum, and so we're going to have to postpone that until the next meeting or a special meeting, which will be decided at a later time.
Kind of my schedule. My hope was to publish the latest date. Our preferred date to publish this RFP was by December 5th. Then all proposals will be due by December 19th. Sometime between, I apologize, let me start over. So we were hoping to publish by December 5th. We were hoping to have them due no later than January 2nd. That's kind of a long time. We would usually allow 2 to 3 weeks, but that's kind of a wide time frame. We would then have it before the council for approval January 9th, so that we could have the contract negotiated and done and in place well in advance of the agreement. So without being able to discuss it today, we would need to I would recommend having a special meeting in December. We had talked about not meeting at all in December because of the way the holiday schedule fell. But I think a tentative date at this time, and of course it'll depend on the folks that aren't here, but are y'all available Thursday, December 14th? It's not it wouldn't be our normal meeting time. That's actually the second Thursday of the month.
How long do you have to have that special meeting posted?
3 days. I have to post.
What if we were to do it on the 30th of this month?
Sure. Let me
I'm
reach.
just thinking getting it done as soon as possible so that we don't completely blow your timelines.
I'm not gonna have any. I don't have any problems with that date. No, not currently.
We would meet just to go over this. It would be a quick meeting. Give the
Maybe you have
subject
any
matter due
problems
cause.
with the
But okay.
So let's shoot for the 30th. We'll find out if the other committee members can be involved then, but let's go ahead and put it on our calendars for the 30th at noon.
You'll send out a reminder, right?
Yeah, I'll check
Okay.
the venue availability, all of that, and I'll notify y'all when we've got that nailed down. But that's a good solution. I appreciate that.
So we'll keep an eye on our emails to see communication from Morgan as to whether we can make that happen.
Yes, I'll have an answer to y'all by Monday.
All right, discussion and possible action related to the animal control procedures for wildlife cases.
Okay, so I kind of had a schedule of SOPs that I was going to start reviewing, start rewriting, bringing to you, et cetera. Wildlife was not on my radar, but it continued to come up as an issue. As we started getting our folks through our basic animal control certification course, we talked a lot about wildlife with our contacts at the state. And so the more we talked about it, the more I realized every organization kind of handles wildlife differently. Some organizations say it's game warden's job. We're out. We have nothing to do with wildlife. It's not something we're going to handle. And some organizations do a lot with wildlife. And so it really runs the gamut. As it pertains to us, wanting to prevent the spread of disease, wanting to make sure and ensure the public health, we developed the following that we'll go over here shortly. What I also found that not only each organization ran the gamut of what they did, but even in my own organization, one officer preferred to handle things this way, one officer refused to handle things that way, and I want to be able to allow for some of that, meaning that there are some animals that I want to provide for the animal control officer to be able to euthanize, right? But I also want if it's their preference to not euthanize, to try to find another solution to release to a certain area, to be able to allow for that as well. And so we're going to allow for officer discretion, but it's going to be within very strict guidelines under the following. So I basically broke it into 3 major categories. Those species that are at high risk of carrying rabies, which is all we really talk about at my facility, but then those that are at low risk of carrying rabies, which we don't talk about until one comes up, and then those that are no risk for carrying rabies, which I don't think we'd really ever thought of them that way. And so really to be able to categorize in that way I thought was important. So to speak to the high risk of carrying rabies, of course, that's your skunks, raccoons, bats, foxes, coyotes. We deal very little with foxes and coyotes at all. They're generally not inside the city limits. They're generally not near people. We have very few calls related to foxes and coyotes. We occasionally get the call about, bats in the closet or whatever it may be. We get a ton of calls about skunks and raccoons. That is the vast majority of what we're dealing with there, okay? So we really broke this down into 2 different components. Is you shall do these things or you may do these things, okay? So if it's a high risk of carrying rabies, you shall euthanize and test for rabies if their human contact is known. It does not have to be a bite because it's transferred through saliva. That animal could lick, it could whatever. If I have, a family sitting on the front porch petting a baby skunk, I'm sorry, but that's the end of that baby skunk. It's not something that's meant to be handled by people. You also shall euthanize if ill. We should test for rabies if symptoms are consistent with rabies. So we had a raccoon recently. She had very stiff limbs. She was not responding to stimuli appropriately. We went ahead and there was no human contact known, but we went ahead and did the rabies test just to be sure. And it was right on the heels of a positive rabies test that Abilene had in a raccoon as well. And so we just wanted to be vigilant in that. Okay. We also shall euthanize if it's injured. If it is a high risk of carrying rabies, we're not going to reach out to a wildlife rehabilitator. And that may be controversial, but the main reason for that is they're high risk of carrying rabies. There are so many skunks and raccoons that we really want to prevent the spread of disease. If the wildlife rehabilitators want to get involved with some of these other animals we're going to talk about, the low risk for carrying rabies, the no risk for carrying rabies, I am wide open to that. But if it is a skunk, raccoon, bat, fox, coyote, we're happy to just go ahead and remove them from the population for the public health. That's what's at our heart of it. So these were kind of some tough decisions, but that was one that we felt strongly about, okay?
Morgan, I have a question on the first one. As far as contact is going, do we need to specify human contact? I mean, what if they were to come in contact with a cat or a dog? I mean, if it's known contact with a cat or a dog, because those can be transmittable to those animals as well.
That's a good point.
Should we broaden that scope a little more?
Sure.
I would agree to that. Possibly, I would at least definitely agree if there has been known to have bitten an animal for sure, or the dog brought it up in its mouth, then probably be something that you probably should consider. And if a cat brought up the dead, bat, it could have bit the cat and you won't see it because bat bites are very, very, very small. So I think that might be a good addition.
And I'm in my head, I'm seeing a dog and a raccoon in the backyard and raccoon scratching the dog or, something to that effect. And
I've seen that, so I will agree.
Yeah.
It's not a far-fetched fear.
What we've been doing in those cases is the difficulty in that is obtaining the specimen. So if we had a video out recently about the animal control officers out on duty, and we had a dog that attacked a raccoon, and the raccoon was injured beyond any medical treatment. And so we asked the homeowner if their own pets were current on rabies. We asked the homeowner to quarantine their dogs, and we did take the raccoon into custody. And so we can take that one step further and go ahead and test for rabies as well. I think that's a good point.
I also feel that just with the lack of water in the surrounding countryside right now, I mean, we have received a lot more rain, but it does drive animals into the city, and in this part of the state, we have gray fox and bat and skunk rabies. Those are the animals that are known to be carrying it in this area. Luckily, the raccoon variant of carrier rabies is not in this area last time I checked. So that's definitely something to
I know that
be worried
I follow
about.
several animal groups on Facebook, local animal groups on Facebook, and there was a group talking about a fox that was in somebody's backyard off of Van Buren drinking out of a pool. So, yeah.
And that's one of the other things we'll kind of talk about under the may category, meaning that if you encounter a fox in someone's backyard, that's not really behavior in line with a healthy fox. You know, they want to stay away from people. If you see a raccoon out during the day walking through somebody's yard, walking down the street, that's an unusual behavior for a raccoon. And so in that case, we did offer an option called this, and it's where we may euthanize these high-risk animals, regardless of whether they're ill, injured, or contact with a human or domestic animals. We'll add that. So that would mean that if you came into contact with any animal that was at high risk for carrying rabies, you could go ahead and euthanize that animal at that time, simply because they're a high-risk species. So that would allow for these behavioral type things. You know, it's not ill, it's not injured, it didn't come into contact with anybody, but it is not acting right. I don't feel right about this raccoon. Then we would go ahead and euthanize it. We also offered that we may relocate these animals. And so that's the most frequent thing that we're doing with raccoons is that we have several, so we can't relocate, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we may relocate these animals if they're not ill, not injured, there's no contact.
So is animal control coming in contact with these types of animals through cat traps mainly?
Yes, primarily. And so because they're wildlife, we don't respond if they're just at large. You know, we get a call at 8 o'clock at night, hey, there's a raccoon in my backyard. We'll secure your trash, close your sheds. That's what raccoons do. We can't come out and just catch a raccoon because it's in your backyard. He's being a raccoon. But yeah, if they're trapped in or injured, that's the point that we would respond. Okay, so to talk a little bit about those animals that are at low risk for carrying rabies, we have citizens that would call us and want us to euthanize all of the rodents, okay? Well, rodents are at low risk for carrying rabies, and if it's our job to prevent the spread of disease, then let's really talk about what that means. And so low risk for carrying rabies is going to be all other terrestrial mammals, rodents, because we deal with porcupines a lot. We get a lot of calls about porcupines, rabbits, possums, shrews, moles, armadillos. Now, I did asterisk this, and this is why, is we're here to prevent the spread of disease. Rabies is not the only disease that can be spread from animals to humans. Other items such as anthrax, salmonella, encephalitis, all kinds of things can be spread from these low-risk animals or even no-risk animals. Hantavirus, I mean, any number of things. So we would still tell people they're still wildlife. Please still don't handle them. And so we're still going to respond if these animals are in a trap or secured in someone's yard at some place, but we're going to handle them a little differently than those high-risk animals, okay? So it's very simple with low-risk animals. We shall relocate them unless they're injured or ill, okay? If they are, so we may euthanize if injured. We may seek a wildlife rehabilitator if injured. So that's where we get into the point where we have 2 permitted wildlife rehabilitators here in town. If we have an injured porcupine, possum, whatever it may be, we may contact a wildlife rehabilitator at that time. We also may euthanize if they're injured or if they're ill. Now, although they're low risk of carrying rabies, any mammal can get rabies. So we will euthanize if ill, test for rabies if the symptoms are consistent with rabies. And we will euthanize, or you may euthanize if human contact and test for rabies. So for example, if you have children on a playground at school and they have found a baby armadillo and they are an armadillo is a bad example, a rabbit. I found a rabbit, I found a shrew, I found a mole, and the kids are playing with it. Oh my goodness, what a fun thing. And so parents may say, I want it tested for rabies. We can certainly do that. It's not at high risk for carrying rabies, but we want the public to have that peace of mind. So we can go ahead and do that as well, something we may do with those low risk for carrying rabies. So then that brings us to the animals that are at no risk of carrying rabies. So that's reptiles, amphibians, birds. For us, we encounter a lot of geese. You know, the river runs through downtown. Geese are in the road. People are concerned about them. We try to just shoo them back to their natural area. Occasionally, we have an injured goose. We bring it in the shelter. It's very loud. But we encounter birds. We encounter snakes, things like that. So if it's at no risk of carrying rabies, the only time we shall euthanize is if it's injured or ill. Okay? But we may relocate to safety, we may seek a wildlife rehabilitator, and we may euthanize if it's a venomous snake. So we had a lot of dialogue about this, right? That these animals serve a function in the ecosystem. What we really, if you have a rattlesnake that's outside of a Head Start program, outside of a daycare, outside of a preschool, we want to go ahead and secure that animal and remove it from the impending, public safety. The issue with that is rattlesnakes are notorious for traveling miles back to their home turf, okay? So I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself again. The areas we're limited to relocate to, it's almost certain that snake's going to return back to its area. It may not be on the front porch of the daycare, but it's going to be in the area, right? And so we wanted to offer our officers the opportunity to go ahead and euthanize if it's a venomous snake, even if it's not sick, even if it's not injured. You do have the option to go ahead and euthanize it because there's really no safe way to prevent public contact for the rest of its life, right? So the concern there is that, how do I say this? Our animal control officers are very cognizant of they don't want to be cold-blooded killers, right? We have to euthanize so many animals in a year. You've seen the numbers. So we don't want to euthanize if there's any way an animal can be saved, can be relocated. And so I have snake lovers. I have folks on my staff that are like, I really want to do whatever I can for this animal. And so we do want to offer that. But we do have a very strong contingency in the other side saying, if it's a venomous snake, let's just take care of it. And so we have that option there in place for your consideration. Okay, so as far as relocating wildlife, we talked about using only approved locations. This is something we have to be in contact with the game warden about. And again, I mentioned some of the smaller jurisdictions say, I don't do wildlife, call the game warden. There was a rattlesnake inside the Llano County Sheriff's Department. They run their animal control through the Sheriff's Department, and their own employee said, call the game warden, this is not my gig. And that's certainly our option. Our game warden is overrun, where we're left to carry a lot of the overflow, and it certainly makes sense for us to do that. So, but they still need to be informed on what we're doing. If we get a bunch of calls about, I have a bunch of raccoons lately, what's going on with that? And game warden's like, wait, you're releasing raccoons there? So am I. And so we need to just stay informed so we're both aware of that. We also need to cycle through the release locations by species. So if I have a raccoon, I'm gonna release it here. If you have a raccoon, don't release it there. I just released one there. And so we'll cycle through those areas. Be aware of the natural behavior of the species, so that, again, goes back to snakes. They're going to travel miles to get back to where they are. Other species behave in certain ways as well, so it's important to be aware of this one needs to be near water, or this one needs to be wherever. Porcupines are cute, but they don't eat insects. They don't, if you're looking for a redeeming quality of a wildlife, porcupines are basically sloths. Like, they're not, so if you're gonna release a porcupine, you better make sure that they're gonna be in a safe place, because they're not very fast moving. They have very few ways to protect themselves. And so you wanna be able to kind of watch them, make sure that they're getting on their way and doing whatever they're doing. And it must be within city limits because of our limited jurisdiction. By the state, we wouldn't be able to release outside the county, but of course, because we are run by the city, it can only be inside the city limits. Okay. So next, talking about euthanasia in wildlife. So here's the problem that we run into, right? The vast majority of the time, if we're euthanizing something that is wildlife, we are going to euthanize with the pentobarbital solution through the abdomen, like we do a lot of other euthanasias. It's a very quick way to handle that and be humane. But when you have an injured deer, I don't have enough medicine to handle that kind of large animal, okay? We had to have a creative solution with the sheep, for example, because we ran out of meds in the field. We had to bring more meds out to the animal control officers. So for an injured deer, our first response is we need to call a peace officer. A game warden can dispatch with their firearm, so can San Angelo Police Department. I had a long conversation with Chief Howard about that. That would be the most humane thing to do for an injured deer, okay? Unfortunately, we sometimes don't have that response or immediate availability to law enforcement, and so at that point, we're forced to consider slicing their jugular and dispatching them that way. And then for venomous snakes, can you find the stomach on a snake? You can, I can't. So unfortunately, what we're left with to euthanize a snake is to cut off its head. I hate to be gruesome, but it's a fast way to go. We equipped our staff with better knives, so we're not just using like a dull, like a hoe or something like that. We want to be as humane with the animal as we can, but we do recognize that, because we spoke to City of Midland, for example, they have like a snake box, and they let the snake curl up in there, and then they have a long injection needle, and they are doing pentobarbital into the stomach, and I'm like, y'all could train us on that one day, because we don't feel equipped to really do that yet. So it kind of runs the gamut what other organizations are doing, and that was a lot of our research that went into proposing this protocol that's before you today.
The one thing about a snake is that it's pretty much just a long tube. So once you kind of know what part, middle, front third, middle third, back third, it gets a little bit easier on that part.
So that's our proposal before you today for the wildlife. We'll certainly make the suggested edits if y'all are okay with that.
A question on, as far as shall euthanize injured wildlife. To what extent of injury do you make that decision? I guess my point is, obviously, if it's a severe injury and it's best, to put them down, then that's fine. But I mean, if it's something that a wildlife rehabilitator would be willing to take on, if you've got a broken wing or a snarled foot or something like that, I mean, how do they decipher what is a critical injury, I guess is my point.
And I apologize, I noticed that as I was going through it. On the animals that are low risk for carrying rabies, we listed may euthanize and may seek wildlife rehabilitator. But then for the no risk, I said shall euthanize. And so I think that should be may as well, because a wildlife rehabilitator could come in there for an injured snake, an injured whatever it may be. And then we often defer to that wildlife rehabilitator. They're quite honest with us. They'll tell us this is not an injury that I can deal with.
I think that'd probably be a good just change of wording. I'd agree to that. I noticed that kind of going through, and that was a little inconsistent. So
for animals that are at no risk for carrying rabies, everything will be may. May euthanize, may relocate, may seek wildlife rehabilitator, may euthanize a venomous snake. All of it will be may. There's no hard and fast rules on the no risk for carrying rabies. It will all be may, officer discretion.
Do you have any public comment on these procedures? Committee?
Seem very well thought out, so.
Do we need to take a vote to approve these? Okay, so we have a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's what I'll have for y'all today. As a reminder, we're not having our December meeting due to the holiday schedule, and so our next regularly scheduled meeting would be January 18th. And then, of course, I'll get back to y'all on this special meeting. I did also want to brief y'all on a situation. Our shelter supervisor tendered his resignation, and yesterday was his last day. He moved on elsewhere in the city, and so we certainly wish him well in that capacity. And so we are seeking to fill that job and get somebody new in place. And so we'll keep y'all informed on that process. From an ASAC perspective, this person is integral in making sure that we are implementing proper cleaning procedures, proper veterinary medical procedures, intake, making sure our processing is happening correctly, that we're holding animals for 3 days if they're stray, 10 days if they're owned, whatever it may be. And so a lot of the compliance with state law and and local policy is overseen by this person. And so we are looking for a talented individual to step in and fill those shoes.
Any other business? Guess we are adjourned.